what I'm going to start off with is because a lot of people always ask me, how did you get the job that you have? Or, you know, what is the job that you have? One thing is a question. But, so, I'm fortunate enough to be, as Kevin said,
There we go. Part of the Lucasfilm Story Group, and I work with creatives across the industry, whether they're filmmakers or comic book artists or novelists. We work together to build a narrative for Star Wars and make sure that the movie that you see connects in some ways to the animated series that you may be watching, that also connects to the comic books that you're reading, and connects to the novels that you may be reading. So, how did I get there, and how did that all start? Well, all these stories always start off a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Or in this case, in 1977. 1977 is always the kind of the ground floor when you're talking about Star Wars. And in my case, 1977 meant, here we go, I forgot this intro, from Winnipeg to Star Wars and back. So this is me in 1977. I'm the young guy on the very far end of the corner there. That's the family, the Hidalgo family. And we've got some of the family extended here. Back there, yeah, that's the new generation of Hidalgos over there. But here we have the original generation that came from Chile to Winnipeg, and that was 1977. I was only 2 years old at the time. So Star Wars was at that age. Clearly, I was not on the ground floor of Star Wars at that time because I was only 2 years old. But Star Wars came out in 1977. Here it is in Winnipeg. If you were in Winnipeg at the time, you could get a really good deal on chicken. Look at that crust. Eat that. Yeah, we were playing with Todd Rundgren, which I'm sure they mean Todd Rundgren, but maybe it's a Todd Rundgren tribute band. Todd Rundgren is playing. Anyway, that's Winnipeg in 1977. Star Wars did not come out in Winnipeg on May 25th, 1977, like it did in the U.S., but it was a different time. Nowadays, when a movie opens up, it opens on thousands of screens on the same day across the world. Star Wars only opened in 32 theaters. That's it. 32 theaters were the only place you could see Star Wars on May 25th, 1977. And it was different. So what would happen is those 32 theaters would say, it's a hit, it's a hit. And they'd get more theaters, and it would just grow and grow and grow. Nowadays in movies, they open on thousands of screens trying to get as much money as they can in that first window, because that first weekend or two is the make or break for movies nowadays. So it was a very different time. Here in Winnipeg, we had to wait till about July for this movie to come out, and it opened. What was also different back then is a movie would stay in the theater for a year. Like you would see it, like you'd see the ads in the Winnipeg newspapers at the time. They would have a little snipe on the bottom, a little text that would say, you know, 4th fabulous week, 5th amazing week, 6th fantastic week. And sure enough, for Star Wars, 52nd amazing week. It played for a year straight in some places. So was I a Star Wars fan from the beginning? You gotta understand, I was born in '74, I'm 41 years old. For anyone around my age, it really didn't mean much to be a Star Wars fan during the time of the original trilogy. Were you a fan? Yes, by virtue of the fact that you were a kid and Star Wars was out. You could not escape it. The original trilogy, 1977 for Star Wars, 1980 for Empire, 1983 for Return of the Jedi, it was simply inescapable. It's what you played when you went to school. It's what you talked about with other kids. It wasn't a huge mark of distinction to be a Star Wars fan back in the day. Just to give you another snapshot into my childhood, because it's going to become relevant as I continue going on. Another major staple for me in 1982 was G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero. That was a huge toy line. I was super into it. I loved it. So I was a G.I. Joe fan by extent that I was a fan of this as well when I was a kid. And also 1984, a couple of years later, a little something you may have heard of called Transformers hit the market, and I was a huge, huge fan of that. So anyway, it's probably not an unusual story. Anyone around my age has the same kind of story to tell. So it wasn't that big a distinction to be a Star Wars fan back in the day. What made you a Star Wars fan back in the day is if you kept with it, even after it went away. By 1986, Star Wars was gone. No one was talking about Star Wars anymore. But if you kept it in your heart, you'd find other people and say, "Oh my God, you're still into Star Wars? Me too. Wow." You know. So it was 1987 when Star Wars was ostensibly dead that you could actually make a distinction and say, "Yeah, I am a Star Wars fan." Because at that time, what I was into was the role-playing game. And it was published by this company called West End Games, and they made role-playing games. And I'm sure a lot of you know what a role-playing game is. It's not a computer game, it's a pen and paper game. You print out the books, you roll dice, you make up characters. A lot of fun, storytelling. That's what I was into. That's when I became a hardcore Star Wars fan. Because with my friends at the time, we gather around the table and we tell Star Wars stories. And in order to be the best Star Wars storyteller I could be, I would read that Star Wars source book that's on there. That would be my Bible. I would understand it backwards and forwards and become as in-depth a knowledge expert on Star Wars as I could possibly become. So that was a major thing for me. And I ended up playing with Star Wars role-playing game from 87 to 93 with different groups of characters. That's my little doodles that I make with my friends, and we tell our own Star Wars stories. And that was it. I mean, it became my outlet at the time when no one was really talking about Star Wars. So one of the things that happened in 1994, this company that makes these Star Wars games had a publication called the Star Wars Adventure Journal. And they opened it up for fans. They said, hey fans, if you want to write for this, send us your ideas and we'll publish you. Well, what happened is they weren't supposed to do that. That is actually against Lucasfilm policy. Lucasfilm policy is that in order to get published, you have to be a pre-established or pre-published author. What West End Games was doing was actually breaking those rules. So I had written a sample, and I wrote like you fill out a questionnaire and all this stuff, and I wrote to them. And they must have sent out all these form letters out to everyone who did this because they weren't supposed to do this. So they sent me a form letter saying why they couldn't take my submission. They can't take unsolicited submissions. But the editor of this publication was nice enough to write me a personalized letter on top of that saying, you know, we really like the look of what you were sending, but unfortunately we can't look at it. So me, as a joke, wrote back to that editor with a form letter thanking them for not just sending me a form letter. Like it was this like thing that I just filled out, say thank you for not sending me a form letter and whatever. It's just a joke, right? And what happened is that struck up a conversation and an ongoing correspondence with this editor. And we kept in contact, exchanging letters, and he bent the rules for me to say, you know what, I like the quality of your writing in these letters. I want to give you a chance. You're going to write an article for this magazine. So there's a lesson in there. If you could fail gracefully or fail with a sense of being a smartass, it might continue to open a door that was otherwise closed for you. You know? So that happened, and I ended up being published quite a bit in this Star Wars Adventure Journal. I was establishing weird little details like the history of the R-Series Astromech droid, where R2-D2 comes from and all this stuff. And would write short stories and things like that, and I would continue doing this. And these are some of the works that I did. What had happened was, I was in college at the time. I was at Red River taking creative communications, and we had this project called the Independent Professional Project, where you're basically given a year to come up with this massive work that is almost your thesis as a creative. And it gives you a lot of leeway. The main things that was put upon us is to come up with a creative idea, and then come up with a plan that you could actually sell it to the world and put your name on it, and would actually advance your career as a creative professional. So I had the ambitious ideas. I'm going to make my own Star Wars encyclopedia. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write the story. I'm going to encapsulate everything I know about Star Wars and turn it into an encyclopedia. And my instructor at that time had no idea how to judge that. He's like, I think you're doing this right. I don't know. I guess you're the authority on this. But what I did with that self-made encyclopedia is I took it down to this fan convention and actually showed some folks from West End Games, and eventually this guy who works at Lucasfilm saw my work and was really impressed. And that guy who saw my work was the author of this book, the Star Wars Encyclopedia, the real encyclopedia that Lucasfilm produced. Steve Sansweet, if you're a Star Wars fan, you probably know who this guy is. He's got the biggest Star Wars collection in the world. He was writing this encyclopedia. He was just starting it in '96, and I showed him to my version of it. He was impressed by what he saw, and I offered to proof the version of the book that he was writing.